season 3 of Ed Technical. Some of you listeners might have noticed some small changes to our intro. It almost turned into a blood feud between Libby and I, but hopefully you guys like it now.
Yes, it was surprisingly hard to pick the new jingle. But jingle aside, we are really excited to say we're going to be doing more in the AI in education space. Building on Owen's research work and my experience investing in EdTech at the Jacobs Foundation. We're excited to say we're going to be doing more in the AI in education space. Our conversations with experts on this podcast has pointed to a real need for more accessible research to help people navigate this pretty confusing space, and also new ways of supporting promising EdTech companies to build and scale the products they're working on.
But today we're actually going to be doing a good old-fashioned podcast episode with a new guest, Jason Yeatman. Tell me more about Jason. Jason's just like a smarter, nicer version of me, basically.
Yeah, smarter, nicer.
Be careful. Pick your words carefully now.
There are so many options there. I thought best just to pause. No, but seriously, Jason's an awesome guy and a great person to kick off season 3 with. He runs a neuroscience lab at Stanford looking at the neurobiology of reading, which Jason, Owen, correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand that to basically be like a mechanic for the brain. So understanding like how our brain and nervous system works. He's also the founder of Raw, which is a really interesting reading assessment tool, a rapid online assessment of reading, which hundreds of thousands of kids have taken. And he's also just a really interesting, like thought-provoking person to talk to about some of the future when it comes to reading, particularly now we're in this AI era. So really excited to have him on. And let's hear from him.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk to Jason. He's a specialist in reading research, and I was a reading teacher, and this is like kind of the area that I'm most passionate about. So if you hear me get a little overexcited on the interview with Jason, give me some slack. It was really fun opportunity to get a chat with him. So hope you guys enjoy the episode.
Okay, well, Jason, welcome to Ed Technical. It's great to have you here with us.
Thanks so much. Great to be here.
And where are you calling in from today?
Back at Stanford University, right before we move into our new building.
Nice. And what do you do at Stanford? Tell us a bit more about your research interests.
So I'm a professor, have an interesting joint appointment across education, pediatrics, neuroscience, and psychology. I actually did my PhD here too. My PhD focused on the neurobiology of reading, basically looking under the hood and trying to understand how this incredible cognitive skill shapes brain development and how differences in brain organization lead to challenges or strengths learning to read. And historically, that's been the foundation of my lab's work. We do a mix of brain imaging. There's a lot of engineering work developing quantitative MRI measurements to quantify what's going on in here. And also the application of interventions and educational programs to understand this interplay between brain maturation, learning, what's going on in the classroom.
So for non-neuroscientists, can you help give us a bit more insight into like what's going on in the brain, like when we're reading, like what is reading, like what is that computation?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's the most interesting thing the brain does. I mean, this is what got me started in this. I went into my PhD. I was really interested in basics of brain plasticity and how experience sculpts brain development. And I found reading just at this like incredibly interesting cognitive function, like incredibly interesting thing the brain learns to do, right? You, when you're reading, someone puts something in front of your eye and you suddenly hear the sound of it in your mind, right? That's like what you as literate adults, what your brain has learned to do. And the challenge for a teacher or someone like Owen that's thinking about like building education technology through this is like, you need to create those circuits in a young kid's brain. Right. And they're not just lying there latent, waiting to spring up. Right. Reading is relatively new in our evolutionary history. So, if you think about the difference between reading and speaking, like, kids, most kids learn proficient communication and spoken language just by being in an environment with a lot of language around them. Whatever language is around them, they will learn to speak it. No one has to teach kids to wait 30 milliseconds before moving this articulator muscle to pronounce a certain phoneme. They just pick it up naturally. Reading, on the other hand, unfortunately, no amount of text in front of a kid, they're not going to discover the code on their own, right? They have to be taught this skill, practice it, have like scaffolded instruction over the timescale of years because it's rewiring brain circuits to do something that evolution didn't anticipate. Right? So what does the brain need to do? Right. So reading starts in the eye. I mean, there's other forms of reading. You can read Braille, but like when we conventionally think of reading, right, it starts in the eye. Your retina is transforming light reflected from a page into nerve impulses that are sent to the brain. And I start there because like this is the first step. This is where physics from the world is transformed into a nerve impulse that gets into your brain. Right. So that's the first stage.
You're making reading sound really cool. Like I've never really thought about it.
Reading is really cool.
Yeah.
I'm going to turn you guys both into reading nerds.
Yeah.
Right. So
Already am. Libby is the only one late to the game.
You can and
I have
a pretty compelling case. Most interesting thing the brain does, right?
It's the most interesting
Libby,
thing the brain does.
Are you sold, Libby?
Guys, I'm on board. Reading's cool.
Okay.
Yeah,
good.
I'm into it. So yeah, before I think we should move on to. I've got one more question, and I think we should move on to the kind of future of reading stuff. But Jason, you said that learning to read rewires the brain. What does that mean?
All mammal species have a highly evolved visual system. Primates in particular, like our monkey ancestors too, like have a very evolved visual cortex that's excellent at doing visual recognition. Why is this? It's because like being able to rapidly recognize like friends versus foes, facial expressions, like is critical for the survival of almost any social species. So reading requires like subtly rewiring these circuits. So you don't have a brain region. You were not born with a brain region for processing text, but you have this highly evolved visual system that has kind of this modular framework where like there's regions that are involved in recognizing faces and recognizing like limbs, hands, body positions. You have regions that are involved in recognizing objects in spatial navigation. And as you learn to read, you develop a region that's specialized for processing visual text. And it sits right where you'd expect it, like right kind of within this mosaic. It's actually like right next to the face region. And in terms of when I said like rewiring the brain, this is my lab's research showing that as you teach kids to read, you see changes in the physical structure of the wires that connect these regions together. Basically, in like the physical substrates of computation change as kids learn.
Super interesting.
Oh yeah, so interesting. I've got so many questions, but we should move on.
No, sorry. Can I propose moving on? Just the two-part here.
Libby's trying really hard to get us to some ed tech. I'm good.
No, we want to get there. No, I'm with you.
I can learn out of brain for all day.
This is great. So I think that just two things you said. Like I believe that maybe some people might argue that teaching kids to read is a solved problem. If you could kind of articulate, unpack that idea, but then related is this distinction maybe between learning to read and reading to learn, right? Because at a certain point, if you think about early children, it's just difficult to figure out the spelling and reading, and we can all imagine a kid reading a simple book. At a certain point, hopefully, reading becomes easy enough that you start reading primarily to consume information or think about things. You're not like really practicing, your blends or something like that. And so I guess if you could just kind of unpack those two, because I think that a lot of the questions we have about the future of reading in kind of an AI environment kind of bridge that gap. There's some types of questions that are about like how would a 6-year-old learn the basics of reading, but then there's this other stage of how do you become like kind of a really fluent, effortless reader and read for pleasure or read to consume information.
Yeah, I'm going to partially answer that, and this is a great transition to where Libby wanted to go too, right? So as you said, the early stages are like learning this skill, right? Learning that there's this mapping between symbols and sound and blending together and all that. And your hope is that you have a high quality educational system, a teacher that's teaching from a high quality curriculum and monitoring kids' progress, giving kids that need more support, extra support, and building up this circuitry so that the decoding process, right? And when I say decoding, I mean like translating the visual code to the language code, like what decoding is, becomes automatic and effortless. And then now, the hope is that reading a book versus listening to a podcast are kind of equally easy. You can get information from either way, and then now you can use reading as this tool to gain information from text, to think about like analyzing argument structure, to learn history. Um, but you would also be shocked. So by the way, this is also how our assessment systems are generally designed. The idea is that K-2 in the U.S., so first 3 years of education is learning to read. Starting around grade 3, you should be reading to learn. So often, what we do is early on we assess like how are your foundational reading skills developing. But then starting around third grade, we switch to measuring reading comprehension, and then up through middle school, high school, we just measure reading comprehension. With Roar, we've started all the schools we partner with. We try to work with them to actually use our foundational reading skills measures K-12 or K-9.
Okay.
And one of the reasons for this is that you were talking about I think where you were going to go is say, well, how do okay, kids this is solve problems. Kids have mastered this, and now how do we get them to use reading as a tool for learning? You run an assessment in your average 8th grade classroom in the U.S. Maybe 20% of the 8th graders are still stumbling with the foundational building blocks of reading.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, and so you can read on one level. So it's interesting how people respond to that, because some people are like, oh well, yeah, I guess you're right. Obviously, I read the NAEP reports and I realize how much of the U.S. is not achieving the levels of literacy. NAEP is all around comprehension, and the interesting point here is that as you started with, teaching kids how to read is a solved problem. We know how to do it. We just, for a variety of social reasons, and various other reasons, don't always do it well. We're worried about comprehension outcomes, but actually a lot of these kids that are struggling with comprehension, it's an actionable problem. They just need to be taught the foundations of reading. These kids and young adults, right?
Interesting. And okay. Sorry, no, I'll hold myself back. That's fascinating. This is potentially too far. That I hadn't realized that late students are still, obviously some kids, but I would have figured it would have just been oh, not enough vocabulary, not enough practice reading, but yours doesn't
Totally. I guess the impetus for coming on today for Ed Technical is thinking about Roar. So Roar is the rapid online assessment of reading. This began as a pandemic project. And once we couldn't be in a room with a kid, we started trying to innovate other ways to continue the research without needing to be one-on-one. So it started with a hypothesis that a simple lexical decision task. Don't worry, we're not getting too far into the weeds. So this is just a task where we're flashing text on the screen quickly. Your job is to decide if it's a real word or a made-up word. The hypothesis was that what's going on in your mind is actually the same, whether or not you're asked to read it out loud or just make a simple decision about it. And then we ran a series of studies to ask how similar are kids' responses on this simple, silent lexical decision task to a conventional assessment where you sit in a room one-on-one, have them read out loud, score it. And the first paper we published found that actually the correlation was almost perfect. A correlation of 0.94. It's actually the highest correlation I've had in my scientific career. And we looked at it from different angles. We then ran larger validation studies across different states, across urban versus rural school districts, and what we've concluded is that across all the applications we've looked at, it's a valid way to quickly and efficiently measure reading. It's quite different, right? So reading assessments, particularly for younger kids, are all based around reading out loud. Having a human listen to it, observe it, score it, write down how many words you get correct, which words you get incorrect, record how fast you read. So what this means practically is that you have to train every teacher in this school district on how to administer one of these assessments, how to score the assessment, how to enter the data into the database properly. And each one takes 20, 30 minutes to administer. So that means, I don't know how many kids are in your class, 25 or something like that. This means canceling 2 to 3 days of class, hiring a substitute, and having the teacher go through and assess all these students, right? It's 3 days. And this is a barrier to doing anything at scale, right? But then you go to a school that's doing Roar and you see there's 20 minutes, the whole district, some of the districts we work with are 10,000 students. Everyone's on their laptop, teachers help them get going. Students are taking Roar and teachers seeing score reports in real time.
Yeah, very fast.
Yeah, in real time.
This is great, but I think just to pull out something for maybe some listeners who are less familiar with like kind of the fundamentals of kind of literacy assessment or just literacy in general, am I right in saying that while like reading out loud is great, your point was like what's actually happening in the mind, and from what we know, what's actually happening in the mind is that to be able to read effectively, there has to be a certain amount of automaticity. Like you can kind of recognize a word, and without having to spend too much time decoding each syllable, you kind of recognize it. And as your brain becomes more and more efficient and more practiced at reading, this becomes kind of semi-conscious. And so for early readers, being able to kind of distinguish between a real word versus like a fake word that kind of looks like a word is actually pretty indicative of like how practiced they are at this process of automatically recognizing words. Is that is that an acceptable approximation?
You nailed it. Yeah, let me not get too far into the weeds, but dive into some of the science. So, right. So one thing you're saying is that the way we conventionally assess reading is by having kids read out loud. Why do we have kids read out loud? It's easy, right? Like it's observable, but it's not actually what we care about in terms of reading, right? When you guys were preparing for this podcast, you probably read some stuff on my website. I'm guessing you weren't reading it out loud to Libby.
I tried to, but Libby was like, no.
I was just too much of a slow reader,
And we're still trying to understand the exact mechanisms of why. Like, why are these two, these two very different ways of measuring reading? Why do they end up producing pretty much the same results? But yeah, you got it. And one of the things we've looked at also is like whether this approach is more or less valid at different ages. And one of the interesting, so early on we started with kind of kids in the second to fifth grade age range, worked very well there. But there's a big question of whether as you were kind of saying for the youngest kids that are still just learning to decode 3-letter consonant vowel consonant words, like is this silent approach going to be valid there too? And to our surprise, actually, it was actually like worked even better down into kindergarten and first grade. The goal for ROAR was to say, are there other ways to measure the same construct, the same like process in the mind without needing to have a kid read out loud and have an adult administer and score the test? And schools often come to us and they're like, oh, great. Like, this is a more efficient screener we can use K-2. And now we can take those 2 days of canceled instruction time and we're like, great. Yes, let's help you do that. But also, why don't, it's free, it's quick. For older kids, it's really quick. And every time you would just be shocked about like that there is a very meaningful amount of students that in the upper grades where, it was known that they're struggling, right? But why they're struggling is unknown. People think, maybe if they need more vocabulary or more background knowledge, they're the state. So, if you imagine trying to take, the SATs or something, if you're reading at a second grade level where you're still kind of struggling through multisyllabic words, it's a challenge. And many children struggle learning to read, which is why we need high quality assessments, right? This is a totally automated online assessment platform that can be used in homes. So actually parents can go sign up and have their kids complete the assessment, get the score reports, or can be deployed at the scale of large school districts, hundreds of thousands of students taking ROAR simultaneously, and teachers, principals, superintendents getting score reports in real time that give instructional groupings, find students that are struggling with different skills, suggest ways to do more targeted intervention.
Which is a pretty big deal from a research perspective because, those are big numbers if you're a researcher. So that's very cool. Jason, we were just talking there about assessment. So I want to pick up a provocative comment you threw at us before we started recording this interview, where you said that actually you didn't think that assessment was a great use case for AI, and then you left us hanging. So tell us more.
Yeah, so I get asked this all the time by the AI evangelists around of like, well, won't AI just solve that? I use AI for many things. There's many ways it supports various things I do. I don't think assessment is the right use case. When you're looking at assessment, like what you're looking for is a well-defined, clear measurement scale that that where the properties of that measurement scale, right? So like when you're measuring someone's height, You guys over in the UK use these centimeters and meters, and you can talk
Yes,
about
we're
it in
rational. We're rational. Yes.
yeah, right. So you guys have this measurement system you use, and you can talk about it. Now everyone understands, right? Puts everyone on the same metric. Someone can tell you how tall they are, and you can, it could be someone in Finland that tells you how tall they are in units of centimeters, and you can understand that, right? You can communicate with them, be like, oh, this is a tall person, this is a less tall person. I'm taller than them, I'm shorter than them. And so it's the same thing when we're thinking about measuring academic skills. We want like people use the term assessment, but like the science of it is really, it's a science of measurement. Like, how do you measure the development of these skills? Right? You develop measurement scales. You put, you create tools to tap into these measurement scales. You put kids on scales, and that's the goal. I don't think AI is well suited to do that, right? Because sure, you can figure out you can infer many things about kids, but it's not well suited for this goal of measurement, right? So if you imagine just like, I don't know, having AI ingest photos and create a new measure of height, I don't know. I'd rather just go with inches.
Yeah, no, interesting. I think that maybe the counterpoint it would just
fight.
Not fight. Exactly, it's going down.
I guess
Jason is just
centimeters is fine too. Centimeters is fine too.
Jason has just dunked on the last 8 years of my life, so I feel I have to defend myself. I guess I think just a little bit more about like what I've been thinking about is using either speech to text or LLMs to kind of facilitate parts of existing literacy practice. So I think that like Roar is really fascinating. It's a different thing, but it's like, hey, open-ended comprehension questions, for instance, are a real bear to grade. There's problems, and then you're like, hey, a teacher, if you say, hey, what happened in this story, kind of the gist of a short story, that's something that you can get pretty high level human to human agreement. It's actually pretty easy to design the assessment as long as we're kind of doing this as a gut check or a diagnostic, as long as we're not trying to get too clinical in a diagnosis. For kind of ongoing assessment, this could be pretty useful. And that seems to be like the types of things like, hey, let's have an LLM after we've calibrated a bit, kind of like grade the student's gist of the story, as opposed to making the teacher sit there and read through 50 of them, or those types of applications.
I totally agree, right? And I guess when I said assessment is the right case, I should have like differentiated, right? Because there's like different goals of assessment. Like one thing you might say is like, well, we're developing this like learning platform, that's going to deliver instruction and deliver insights to teachers. And Jason, I think AI can really like drive, I don't know if you have like kids, you have a bunch of tasks you could assign to a kid, and you have, they're going to be on this iPad for 5 minutes. How do you choose the highest leverage task? Should it be working on phonemes? Should it be learning new letters? Should it be uppercase or lowercase letters? These are all cases where I think AI is excellent, right? It's like, having statistical models of behavior and where kids are in the learning progression, and trying to have insights that, I think this is a big goal in ed tech a lot too. Like, to select, you have the array of tasks. How do you select the highest leverage one, right? Or how do you give the teacher, the highest leverage nudge to say, you were about to do this, but maybe this would be it. These are great, I think, uses of AI. But that's, different than the, formal assessment or screening, or, in a sense, like, I think of these kind of as two separate, like, informal assessment to help select, learning progression, versus now needing a formal measure, kind of going back to the height analogy where, height or weight, where you like need formal metrics, right? I think there's a lot of interesting analogies to health, right? So like you go, I'm wearing an Apple Watch now. It gets a lot of health metrics. But when I go to my doctor, they still take my blood pressure, right? Because they want to look at kind of well-known metrics on a well-known scale, even though this provides a lot of similar information, but it doesn't preclude.
Yeah, and if you're trying to say like, hey, like how's my heart rate been the last couple of days? Like your watch could be off plus or 10%, and it'd be fine because you're kind of just trying to get a gist. But if
you're trying to
like figure out the right medication level.
Yeah, right. Or if they're trying to say, is this person at risk of a heart attack and needs to go on medication? That's where you really like, you don't want to be like, oh yeah, kind of the watch says it's like, but the watch says up up your medication
I'm
level,
fine.
or
Yeah.
like, oh, it looks like,
Okay, well, the moment of tension around AI for assessment lasted for about 10 seconds, guys. That was,
Yeah, no.
you actually
I know we
completely agreed.
agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Or that was a disappointing point of agreement.
Okay.
Man.
Okay. Well, I think that now's a good point. I think Jason, we've established that you are a serious expert when it comes to reading, pretty comprehensively. And so we thought you'd be a really interesting person to talk to a bit about the future of reading, particularly now we, have this thing that's called AI. And I think there are some questions about what the implications are for the relative value of reading, like reading development of reading skills. So we have a few questions that we'd love to pick your brains about on that topic. I think, Owen, do you want to say something there?
No, it's
Oh,
great. Yeah,
okay.
that was a perfect transition.
You
I
were
think.
well. Sorry, you're rolling your eyes, so I just wanted to check in case, in case you wanted to jump in. But yeah, great to know.
No,
Thanks. Yeah, you've got
I think there's more conflict between
me and
me
you.
and you
Yeah,
right now.
exactly.
This is yeah, exactly.
I'm quite agreeable.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, maybe it's the Brit causing all the problems on this one. Cool. Well, Jason, maybe no, this could take like an entire episode in and of itself. So, but maybe just to get your kind of knee jerk take on this one. So, reading is important for a number of different reasons, as we've been talking about today. But we all know that rates of reading for pleasure, novel reading, is decreasing, continuing to decrease in the US and other parts of the world. So, kind of how worried should we be about that in your opinion?
I don't have a good answer. I mean, like, it's so hard to figure out what the like what's the future gonna look like. I don't know. I mean, most people in my position, like, it is how I feel. Like, reading's important. That deriving pleasure, deriving information from like text. There's I don't know. It's like connected with humanity for since its invention. Um, how will the world look differently in 50 years or something? I don't know. I mean, I think it would.
Maybe just it's like, do you think? I guess let's say you get to a eighth grade proficiency level, so we get past this NAEP benchmark, which is like you can kind of read the newspaper effortlessly or something like that. But then presumably to kind of read increasingly complex or dense text, you need to keep on practicing, like reading some fancy literature or reading like a college chemistry textbook. It's different than reading the local newspaper.
Yep.
And I guess like one story is kind of like, hey, if you like reading novels, you continue to build more and more fluency and ability, and you expand your vocabulary, et cetera. And so then when someone's in university, they're able to consume information more fluidly.
Yeah,
Something like that. And like,
I think that's like the really
do you
key point,
do you
right?
think that is attention or not? Like, so I think the idea is like if we stop reading for pleasure, and I'm only ever reading 3-page excerpts from my class,
Or AI
how does that
summarized
change
notes.
kind of?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that's really clear. Like, like I do use AI to summarize papers sometimes. Like when a new paper comes out, I'm like, oh, I'll quickly get Google to make the podcast version of it. It never provides like it provides like a high level summary, like kind of like a lay overview. But as a scientist in the field where I need to know the details, no, I cannot get that from an AI overview of it. Like all the details really are critically important, and like differences in how the measurement was made or how like the data were processed are critical for like what I believe to be true after reading that paper. So, for me in my job, I need to be able to, deeply read all the details of a paper. If it's like, kind of core in my field, like when something like outside my field, yeah, the AI summary and the audio overview is great. So I think to your point, like you can't, getting to that level of like detailed in-depth reading just requires a lot of practice. Like going from like once you've learned how to decode words, but now going to be a fluid enough reader to be able to use it as like a primary way to gain information, it requires practice. So without you were saying like getting interested in literature, like reading books for pleasure, that's the way to get the practice. Building your vocabulary, building your knowledge of different syntactic structures. People write differently than they speak. Like the syntax that's used in writing, particularly like academic writing, is different than the syntax that we use as we're riffing on a podcast like this,
Yeah.
Mhm.
right? And
Is
so like
and it
all your information from podcast, and then now you go to like a dense academic paper where you need to like take away like I don't think you're gonna be able to do it.
Yeah, no, and I just building on this. So let's just assume kind of like in some we could say it's dystopic or utopic or who knows what, but like some type of situation where a lot of the text to speech models get a lot better, and you kind of like the was it Learn LM or whatever, like the podcast
Notebook
feature
LM.
where it's more precise. So it does less summarizing, but it's like, it maybe only summarizes by 20%, but you still get 80% of the context. Can we even process complex technical information orally, or is this kind of interchange really kind of like the buffering ability, the ability to like reread or stop or clarify is
Yeah, totally.
fundamentally different in written versus speech?
Yeah, they're like I don't have a really deep scientific answer to that, but we can all think back to our college experiences, and like you go to a lecture and then you read the textbook chapter on that lecture, and even though on one level you can be like, yeah, I analyzed the information content and they were the same. There's a reason that we do both, right? Like you take in information in a different way, and particularly if it's a when you're doing your PhD and you said you did like AI and assessment stuff, like if as you're getting to some of the more technical stuff, like I don't know, like listening to someone read out a bunch of equations and like network architectures, like right, like you would not be able to create in your brain the same conceptual understanding of the space.
But for you guys, I mean, like the economic value and like the necessity of you being able to have like highly sophisticated reading skills is clear. I mean, like researchers, I guess it's less clear the extent to which like other industries or other professions might be beneficial to individuals to reach that same level of sophistication if they're not having to really understand kind of highly complex scientific kind of technical.
But I think there's this other question, like, is there like a minimum viable level of reading below which you wouldn't really be able to make use of the AI tool? So obviously, like, maybe we're wrong, but probably for like, I think we've said that like for your deep neuroscience research, summarizing that, having an LM summarize that at like an 8th grade level is like, it's too lossy. Like you lose too much important information for your role. For I'm not deep into neuroscience, might be okay for me.
Yeah,
right?
might be just perfect. Yeah. I think that's like
but obviously, I think trying to get that at a 2nd grade level would probably be so lost. It's like, why even bother doing it? Like trying to explain like the neurobiology of the reading brain at a 2nd grade level might be kind of preposterous. So it seems like there has to be at least some minimum threshold of reading to be able to make use of any type of summarizing or simplifying tool.
Yeah, totally. You got me thinking back. I gave a talk on the neurobiology of reading with slides to my daughter's kindergarten classroom last year.
How did it go?
It was the talk I was the most nervous about that I've ever done. She said I did a good job.
That's good.
That's all.
Did you get any hard questions?
I got a lot of hard questions and a lot of questions that had nothing to do with the content at all. I got to learn every kid in the class's birthday. That was like the first set of questions. But I didn't think this is like it's like why the questions you guys are asking are like intellectually interesting and also intellectually scary, right? Because like we don't know what the future is going to look like, right? So if we make this decision as like a society, like literacy is just not as important now, so we're not going to invest all the resources for the vast majority of kids because they really need to do something like. We are dramatically reshaping society, right? And so, on like one hand, you said it's true. Most 99% of people aren't gonna need to read like the level of depth to like get the technical details of a scientific paper. But as soon as we make a social policy where like now we're not teaching that, now we've just like X'd out. We've now said all these people will never have the door into the field of being science. I think like that's like the worry as we think about like dramatic change to social policy, and like the argument I haven't heard on the other side it is like, well, what are we replacing it with, right? Like so I think what you could say is like, well it's all like balance, right? Everything's time, our time is finite. So rather than focusing on some level of literacy, we're gonna do something else.
Yeah,
What's that something else? Like what's the thing
that's
where,
more
Yeah.
important.
right, where
Yeah.
we're like, there's these huge risks, right? We're saying no one can, like, we're just not gonna teach kids in a way that could allow them to be, a top level engineer or scientist or literary. Like, there's all these things that are like now no longer going to be careers for most kids because
Yeah.
the social. What do we want to replace that? What's the
Yep.
upside? Like, what do we look up and we're like, well, thank God we took away all that reading instruction time. Now we can.
Yeah, because it can't be YouTube and Minecraft. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
maybe
exactly.
it could.
But
Maybe it
yeah.
could. Who am I to judge? Who am I to make that call? Yeah. Well, that's awesome. I think we've got the title for the episode. Jason Yeatman advocates for dramatically restructuring society. I think that's that's what we'll go with.
Jason Yeatman is scared of dramatically restructuring society.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, this is
I would
this.
like to
I don't.
restructure society to make sure every kid can reach their
Yeah.
potential.
Yeah.
literacy.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
the moment
And I think
turned
this is
on.
a really interesting point, though, because I think that like there is some. I mean, to be clear, I wasn't advocating for this. I was just kind of trying to
Neither me.
do this thought
Yeah.
experiment
Neither
with
me.
you. But what I thought's really, I think that what's scary about the things, it's somewhat plausible because well, if we already are struggling to get all kids like an 8th grade reading level, it's an accomplishment getting there. And so you could imagine like there's this kind of like, if you kind of squint, it sort of makes sense. Like, look, let's just get them to 8th grade. Like, they're not even getting there yet. Like, you can live a good life. Like, there's lots of people who have great lives who don't read a lot and stuff. Like, there's this sense where you kind of like that's good enough.
Yeah.
And if you don't think about it like that, you could see that path and like, hey, well, why do we need to? Like, I can still have a good life. And so it's this really, but then you're like, oh, but then there's all these extension cases that you're foreclosing in advance. It's not like you've gotten to that level and then you decide like, hey, I don't want to read scientific articles anymore.
Yeah.
It's like you're making that decision early on.
Yeah.
But because it's so
Yeah, you're
hard, like
closing
because
doors.
we're
You're
struggling to
closing
get all 8th graders to read proficiently, you could imagine like that shortcut being pretty appealing to like a really resource-strapped large school district who's just trying to do the best by their kids right now.
Thanks for trying to talk through some of these questions with us. It's tricky to ask them and it's tricky to respond to them because I think there's a perception that people are advocating for a certain version of the future, and I think actually it's kind of healthy and helpful just to pose a question and try and try and talk through what some of the possibilities might be. So thanks for doing that with us. Want to be respectful of your time, so I suggest, Owen, that we do move on to the closing questions.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Do you wanna kick us off today?
Yeah, the first one is just something that you think is commonly misunderstood, even among moderately technical audiences. So like Libby and I. So something Libby and I probably misunderstood about AI in education or literacy assessment or something related.
I think I'll go with what we were talking about earlier. Is the disconnect between informal assessments, where AI is I think a great tool to gain information about strengths and weaknesses, versus formal measures where you want to put everyone on like consistent measurement scale, where I think AI is not well suited for that. I think that's often like a kind of misunderstood disconnect, like the different goals of assessment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And do you have a heterodox opinion related to AI in education or literacy assessment that you're comfortable sharing with us?
I mean, I don't think this is like not deeply so, but and with our work with Roar, we're trying to make a high quality assessment accessible, free, fast, and K to 12. I wouldn't say that it's heterodox, but it is different than the conventional approach. Like, I want to be able to every school to have the information in their hands, actually every parent too, of where their kids sit on these different yardsticks of development, kids and young adults.
But I mean, so that's just linking to like not just early grades. Like so much of this kind of fundamental literacy is focused on early grades, and you're like, actually, it's pretty important to keep on tracking that up until high school.
Yeah, because otherwise it creates discontinuities, right? Like you're tracking a problem up until 2nd grade. Everyone's aware of it. Everyone's giving a little bit of extra focus, and then suddenly this problem vanishes in 3rd grade. Why did it suddenly vanish? Well, because you switched to a different measurement scale, right? Like, first you were measuring in inches, then you're measuring in pounds. And these, they're related, but they're different things. And that's like one of my worries with kind of the policy around assessment. There's all these discontinuities that, despite best intentions, let kids fall through the cracks.
Yeah, it makes well, I kind of asked a follow-up question, so the last one's to you, Libby.
So what's your best guess vision for the role that AI is going to play in schools for assessment purposes in the next 2 years? Oh, and FYI, I've shortened it from 5 to 2 because 5 was too long for people.
Good. Good.
In the next 2 years, I think what Owen was talking about earlier is right on, right? Like, that
Nathan,
the
don't
extent
say
to which.
that. Owen's ego is already out of control.
Oh, okay. And I disagree with everything. Owen.
That's it.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's
better?
much better.
Well, Jason, I'm sorry we couldn't have a more vociferous disagreement, but it was
very
chatting with you.
disappointed.
Super interesting.
Yeah, that was awesome.
We'll find something to disagree about. Unfortunately, it's not going to be skiing either. I think we'll probably both agree on that too.
Yes. Cool. Well, thanks a lot. And yeah, look forward to keeping track of your work, and people should go check out Roar. It's a pretty cool tool as well. So definitely recommend folks check that out. Libby, any closing words?
No, thanks, Jason. That was great.
Libby, do you think I got so excited that I creeped Jason out there? I know that happens sometimes with our guests. I think I'm being friendly and they're like, this is too much.
I think, no, I don't think so. I think, Jason's pretty enthusiastic about some of the same stuff that you are.
Okay,
so
that's good. Yeah.
Yeah, I felt a bit like a third wheel, if I'm honest, at times.
Maybe a budding bromance.
Yeah, seriously, who knew reading was so cool, though?
Yeah, it is pretty cool.
I think you guys probably knew that reading was pretty
I
cool.
definitely did, yeah. I think you did too.
A bit of a revelation for me, though. I thought I understood what reading was, but until this interview, I only just realized how little I actually knew about the process of reading and how it changes the brain. So yeah, very enlightening.
Yeah, I've been reading and thinking about deeply for the last couple of years, and it was really interesting. Like, even I was learning some stuff, and I think one thing that really kind of blew my mind was that the idea that even struggling older readers, some of that struggle is like a lack of mastery of the basics of reading. And I thought that was so interesting because, like, I kind of assumed, like, oh, once you learn how to decode well enough, then the problems that maybe a 7th or an 8th grader are having are about vocabulary or familiarity with story forms or all this other stuff, and this was kind of what I was taught when I was a reading teacher. And this point, like, oh no, like, actually, if you don't master the basics of reading well enough, those problems persist, for years and years and years. I thought it was like such an interesting insight that, like, I just hadn't really heard before.
And his point is that doesn't get picked up because literacy assessment normally stops, right? And so he was highlighting the importance of like ongoing assessment into later ages to really like pick up some of these challenges that you might assume that kids are already at a certain level of proficiency, but the reality is they're really not. And huge,
absolutely. And like when I was teaching reading, like this was a huge problem because there was so much shame and embarrassment whenever I was trying to work with them on the fundamentals of reading, like, hey, like, let's work on, recognizing these word sounds. They'd be like, I know how to read, don't treat me like a baby. And there was like so much shame and complexity there. And
I think the other reason why is also just cost and like the practical issues associated with like annual or super regular literacy assessment through all these years. It's just really until, relatively recently just not being like cost effective to be able to do that. And so like tools like Raw, like the one Jason's building, kind of change that calculation because it's so much like easier, quicker and cheaper to run these assessments on a regular basis, which is really cool. So one question I had, so I was really hoping there was going to be some beef between you guys about use of AI for assessment. I've never seen such like a reasonable, mild disagreement evolve so quickly into like total consensus at the moment. So that was a big disappointment for me. But like, help me unpack a little bit kind of Jason's point around, he doesn't see AI as being like summative sort of formal assessment as being a great use case for AI. So yeah, can you unpack that a little bit for us?
Yeah, I think there's like kind of vibe-based assessment that teachers are constantly doing, but that vibe-based assessment is usually very approximate, and it's mainly like, oh, something's wrong here. I have to go dig into what's going wrong, right? And at least I think this is where Jason agrees. Like those types of uses, you could still imagine like pretty interesting applications for different types of AI. Like kind of have a kid read a story independently, and you ask them some basic questions about the story. if they don't get the answer to the story right, like it flags it for a teacher to go figure out like, hey, what's going on here? What's the
This is
issue?
like diagnostic,
Yeah.
formative assessment.
Sort of, yeah, but it wouldn't. I think what's different, and this is kind of going back to our conversation with Dylan, is it wouldn't reliably be able to tell you what went wrong. And so depending on some use of diagnostics, like you also want to know what was the mistake being made. And I think Jason's point was like, hey, there's lots of reasons like Roar that is pretty good at telling you what's going wrong. And there's these properties of kind of more structured, formal, rigorous literacy assessment that you want to be able to compare. So you want to say, oh, a kid got this mark on the assessment, and another kid somewhere else a month later got this other score, and like I might be able to tell you something that you can't do with a vibe-based assessment.
So this is like the analogy that you guys are talking about. The Apple Watch is kind of vibe based. Like,
yeah, it
is this like, going to flag some like serious like heart rate issue, and then you would go to the doctor and get super precise.
Or, like, hey, I'm feeling like, you might usually a conversation with the doctor might start with you describe some subjective symptoms, right? And the doctor like, oh, whoa, like, you shouldn't have, your feet shouldn't be itchy every day. Like, let me dig into that or something like that.
That's such a weird problem. That's such a weird example.
Sorry, guys.
You have to have itchy feet.
No, I guess I maybe no. Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, moving on.
Moving on. Now I've totally lost the thread for the rest of this
episode. Season.
Yeah. But anyways, I think what was great was when we kind of went to the part of the episode where this idea of kind of what are potentially longer term implications for readings and what that means. I thought that was really pretty fun. It was like seriously speculating about something, like trying to, we don't really know, but let's kind of unpack some of the potential core elements there.
Yeah. And I think it was, I really appreciated just Jason's approach to that conversation. I think it's a good note for lots of us working in the field, Jason's kind of open-mindedness, humbleness, and I think asking some of the really big, important questions about, who gets to decide how this plays out and what are the implications, for different groups of students and learners. How do we make sure they're not being like disadvantaged in some way through potential future scenarios where, things like we might be questioning the value of kind of certain I'm kind of losing myself there.
Don't lose yourself. We believe in you, Libby.
Yeah. So one of the conversations we were having with Jason was really around the future relative value of reading, given some of the potential scenarios that we could be facing when it comes to AI. So thinking about things like different ways of being able to quickly and efficiently digest content, as opposed to reading. What implication does that have for the relative like economic value of reading, which I think's quite a valid question to be asking, versus the relative value of reading for pleasurable purposes, or like how much does that matter, and like what level of complexity of text does everyone need to be able to engage with? Like, it is the kind of one that we were circling around with Jason. And I think as he said, I think the key question is, well, like, what's the alternative? Like, what's the trade-off being made, and like what is the implication for individuals' kind of quality of life and life opportunities if you potentially sort of close off certain pathways for them, like early on.
When I was high school reading teacher, like sometimes I was assigned really challenging books for students, and they hated it. They didn't feel successful. I'm like, sure, I would like them to read Brave New World the way I did in high school and like it, but like if they're like, this is stupid, I don't care about this, is it actually critical that they read, Brave New World? It's like, that's an option now, and I think there is this real potential, but kind of this drift where the culture of behavioral reading really, really changes.
Yeah, these are tough questions. I really appreciated Jason like engaging with us on these. I don't think anyone like has answers, but I think it's really valuable that we're able to like ask the questions and kind of think them through collectively. So I don't think that means that anyone is I don't think that means that certainly not we are advocating for a certain future here, but just that being able to ask a question and have folks like Jason share their real kind of expert perspective is super valuable.
Yeah, and especially since he didn't ultimately disagree with me, that makes it even more valuable. So yeah, if you want to agree with me, come on the podcast. Libby doesn't like that.
Yeah, no, Libby doesn't like that.
Great. So we'll be coming at you guys with a few new, with another short in the next few weeks. But then after that, we're going to talk to a few more exciting guests. Do you want to tell us a little bit about them?
Yeah, so we have a couple of awesome episodes coming up. We have an interview with Candice Odgers from UC Irvine about the evidence around social media use and teen mental health, which is obviously a really important and hot topic that lots of people are interested in at the moment. And then we have our first ever guest from 2 years ago, Daisy Christodoulou, coming on to share her reflections about what's changed or not in AI in education since that first episode a couple of years ago. So yeah, really excited to get those out there. And
yeah, and remember, guys, like and subscribe, right? Like and subscribe. Yeah, but you know, we're doing this for fun. Hopefully, you're enjoying it too. So please just let other folks you think would enjoy it. The best thing you could do if you like what we're doing, is just tell your friends about it. Tell them to listen to Ed Technical.
Okay.
Bye, guys.
Bye.